All right, everyone, get ready because today we're diving into something kind of creepy, but also super interesting. We're talking about decomposition.
Yeah.
We've got this collection of articles all about what happens to, well, us after we die, and we're going to break it all down, the science, the myths, the whole nine yards.
It's pretty wild stuff.
I know some people might think it's a little morbid.
It's a natural human process
Totally.
to be a little squeamish about it.
It's natural, but trust me on this one, there are some seriously interesting facts here and some pretty surprising stuff I think you'll find interesting.
Definitely. And, so many misconceptions about it.
Oh, that.
Even when you know something's a myth, it's hard to shake those ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I got to ask you about this one. I was reading through the articles and I saw this thing about hair and nails growing after death. Is that a real thing?
Okay, so the Deadly or Just Dead article thankfully debunks that myth for us.
Okay, good.
What happens is that it looks like they're growing because the skin shrinks as it dehydrates.
Ah, okay.
So think about it. Your hair and nails are made of cells, right? Cells need oxygen. They need nutrients to grow and divide. And once your heart stops beating, none of that's happening.
It's like expecting a plant to keep growing after you stop watering it.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So if it's not actually still growing, what is happening when we decompose? Like, what's the breakdown here?
So in the simplest terms, it's basically nature's way of recycling. A couple of your articles from Medical News Today had some good definitions. Decomposition is basically when organic matter, like a body, is broken down into much simpler substances.
Okay.
It's a super complex process with a bunch of different stages.
So we go from a living, breathing human to, eventually just a skeleton.
Exactly. And it's also important to differentiate between decomposition and putrefaction.
Okay.
Decomposition is like the whole process.
Gotcha.
Putrefaction is specifically when bacteria break down proteins, and that's when things start to get a little stinky.
Right, yeah. I was going to say, that's the part that people don't really like to think about too much. One of the articles used a phrase that I thought was kind of interesting. They called a body, especially after death, an ecosystem.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
It is a really interesting way to think about it. Because even when we're alive, our bodies are home to just trillions of microorganisms, bacteria mostly.
Right, right.
And they do all this important stuff like help with digestion and keep our immune systems working.
Yeah.
After death, those systems that usually keep them in check, those are gone. So these bacteria populations kind of explode, and they become super important for this whole decomposition process.
Yeah.
So it really shows that even in death, life in some form persists.
An ecosystem. Okay, I like that. So this process of breaking down, it's not just one big thing, is it? There are stages.
Definitely, yeah. It's not just random chaos. It's actually a very ordered process.
Okay.
One of the articles you gave us from Alabama BioClean breaks it down into 5 main stages.
Max stages.
Kind of takes us from fresh to, well, dust. It's kind of like a macabre play in 5 acts.
I like it. Okay, so what's Act 1? What's the opening scene here?
So Act 1 is fresh, or the self-digestion stage.
Self-digestion, okay.
And it starts pretty much right after death.
Right.
So, those enzymes we were talking about? They're like the body's internal cleanup crew.
Right.
But without the regular systems we have keeping them in check, they actually start breaking down cells. So the body's basically digesting itself from the inside out.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it starts on a cellular level. It's not something from outside.
Right.
That is wild. Okay. What about rigor mortis? That has to happen sometime in this first act, right?
You're right. That is a big part of this first act. It's when the muscles stiffen up, and it usually kicks in a couple hours after death.
Yeah.
It's all about, chemical changes happening in the muscle fibers.
Okay.
It can actually last for more than a day, depending on the environment.
Oh.
Temperature and humidity can affect it too.
That makes sense. It explains why bodies are always stiff on crime shows. It's not just for drama, it's real.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the internal stuff, rigor mortis. What's next? This is where it gets
Yeah. Act 2 is bloat.
bloat. Okay.
This is when those smells we talked about earlier really get going. There's all this bacteria in the gut, and as they break down nutrients, they release these gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide. And those gases, they make the body, well, bloat.
Okay, hold on. It actually bloats visibly.
Oh, yeah, it can get big. The article actually says that the body can double in size sometimes. It's kind of hard to miss. And that's when our other friends, the flies, show up.
Oh, right, of course. Because of the smell. I feel like flies get such a bad rap, but they're just doing their job. One of the articles actually called them the unseen undertaker.
I'd love that.
It's kind of accurate when you think about it. They're like the first responders. Do they actually do anything? Like, are they just hanging out?
Oh, no, they're way more than just passive observers. They're super important for this whole thing.
Okay.
Flies, especially blowflies, lay their eggs, and when they hatch, you've got maggots. And those maggots, they eat a lot of the soft tissues.
Nature is so efficient. And by efficient, I mean simultaneously fascinating and like a little nauseating.
Right.
So the body's bloated, flies are laying eggs, maggots are heating. What's next? What happens when the gas has nowhere else to go?
Act 3, active decay. This is when most of the body's mass is lost. All that gas needs to get out, and other fluids start leaking out as the body keeps breaking down.
Right, nature is just practical. It doesn't care if it's gross.
Exactly.
So what happens when things settle down? What's left at that point?
Act 4, advanced decay. So by now, most of the soft tissue is gone. Insects ate it, bacteria broke it down, and you're mainly left with tougher stuffed bones, some hair. The maggots have moved on by this point.
Oh, so what happens then? Do different scavengers come in?
Exactly. This is where insects like beetles with their strong jaws, they're attracted to the leftovers. Like they can break down cartilage. They're like nature's demolition crew.
Wow. From flies to beetles, it's like this perfectly timed system.
It really is. Like every organism has its own part in this whole cycle. Life, death, renewal.
Okay, so the beetles finish up. What's the final scene of the decomposition play?
Act 5, the grand finale, skeletonization.
Skeletonization.
This is where it gets really poetic, you know? The soft tissue, it's all gone. The insects have moved on, and all you have left are bones, maybe some hair. It really makes you think about how temporary our bodies are.
Yeah. From a living person to just bones, it is kind of poetic.
It is, and it actually relates back to what we were talking about earlier, about how uncomfortable people are with death.
Yeah.
One of those Medical News Today articles, there was a quote from Caitlin Doughty, the mortician.
Okay.
She says that because we avoid the topic so much, it makes it harder to deal with death as just a natural part of life.
It's like we're more grossed out by something natural like decomposition than we are by things like pollution, which, we caused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because we don't talk about it, we end up believing these myths like dead bodies automatically spread diseases.
Oh, yeah. I was reading about that. Like, after natural disasters, there aren't necessarily outbreaks, even with bodies around.
Right. The World Health Organization even says that the risk of epidemics from dead bodies, even in disasters, is way lower than people think. Nature's been handling this for a long time, We have immune systems.
That's true. I guess we forget that death is, like, a natural part of nature. Do you think if we, like, really understood decomposition, would that help us with death? Like with grieving?
I think it could definitely help. Because when you understand something, you're less afraid of it.
Makes sense.
We can look at death and dead bodies with less fear and more respect, It could change how we care for people after they die and even lead to more meaningful rituals.
Rituals based on understanding, not fear. I like that. It's like that saying, we need to be as okay with death as we are with birth. Something like that.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of mysteries, did you read about the cadaver decomposition island?
The what? Is that like a real island? Should I not go there?
No, it's not a real island. It's the area right under a decomposing body. As the body breaks down, it puts nutrients into the soil and becomes this hub of activity.
So like super-powered fertilizer.
Pretty much. The article talked about using drones to study them with infrared cameras.
No way.
Yeah, they can see the differences in the soil and plants, which is really helpful for finding graves.
That's incredible. It's like something on a crime show. So we're learning about forensics, ecology, decomposition really does have so many sides to it.
It really does. It makes you think, if we can use this to find graves, what else can we do with it? Could we use it to, help soil?
Yeah.
Make composting better? There's a lot of potential here.
It's pretty mind-blowing and maybe a little creepy depending on how much you think about it.
Maybe. But really, I think it shows that decomposition, even though it seems kind of morbid, it's a really important process. It's necessary for life to exist. It reminds us that everything is connected, and even in death, things change and renew.
That's a great way to put it. Definitely gives you a new perspective. So the next time you see a leaf decomposing or smell something, a little ripe, remember that's just life and death doing their thing. It reminds you that endings are really just beginnings in disguise.
I like that. Even in death, there's so much more going on.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into decomposition. If you want to learn more, and I'm sure you do, check out the show notes. We'll have links to all those articles. Thanks for joining us on this journey.